So I love the listen to your inner voice. Let's make sure that it's your inner voice, right? Like, how can you get there? Well, asking whose voice is this? Is this my belief? I often will challenge people to kind of look at their belief system. Doesn't matter, personal, mental, emotional, and business. Doesn't matter where we're looking. Financial. Does this belief system align with what I really truly think? If I was at a dinner party and it didn't matter what I said, no one was going to get mad, would my opinion be the same as what I'm saying now versus the PC answer that I'm going to give? This is how we identify the voice.
Welcome to Mitlin Money Mindset, your weekly dose of inspiration and insights to ensure you enjoy each step of your journey. Whether you're saving for the future, planning your next big adventure, or simply looking to add more joy to your life, you've come to the right place. Now, let's dive in.
I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the Mitlin Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of Mitlin Financial. Today's guest is Danielle Vann, host of the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. Danielle Vann is a renowned life strategist, best-selling author, and motivational speaker dedicated to helping individuals reclaim control of their lives and achieve their highest potential. Through her highly acclaimed podcast, Get Your Life Together, Girl, Danielle provides listeners with practical tools, empowering advice, and actionable strategies to navigate life challenges, enhance their well-being, and cultivate a mindset of success. With a background in journalism and a passion for personal development, Danielle has created a platform that resonates with audiences worldwide. Her insightful episodes cover a range of topics from mental health and mindfulness to career growth and financial empowerment, making her a beacon of inspiration for those seeking to transform their lives. Join us as we delve into Danielle's inspiring journey, explore her expert insights on personal and financial growth, and discover how you too can get your life together and achieve your dreams. Well, I have the pleasure today of being with Danielle Vann, which I am very excited for this podcast, this show. And she is the host of Get Your Life Together Girl, the podcast. And she has some amazing guests, amazing topics, and I am excited to share her story with you. So welcome to the show, Danielle.
Thank you for having me, Larry. I'm so excited to have a conversation with you today and see where it goes.
Yeah. So listen, I love the entrepreneurial journey, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, but maybe you could just give our listeners a little idea of who you are, what brought you up to that point, what were you doing before then, and what made you go on this entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, that is a long question. So or answer, I guess. We'll condense it down. How about that?
Sure.
So past life, I was a news anchor, a writer, have several published books. And I went through a big trauma, nearly lost our middle daughter. And when I went to go seek, healing or understanding of all my feelings, I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for. And which made me realize that somebody else out there couldn't either. And that's kind of how I started the process. Like, if I can't find what I need, what do I need? And how do I create things that would allow myself, but someone else to heal? And it was organic. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, I'm going to make a business out of it. It was a place that I know that I have the skill set now to help somebody. And that's going to be my mission. And it's grown into courses and podcasts and private sessions and speaking and all these things that I never imagined, that I'm so grateful that I get to do every day.
So an accidental entrepreneur, it sounds like.
Yeah, but I was raised by entrepreneurs. So that's really important, that I learned that just by the nature of my household. My dad had multiple businesses, one that became very large and successful. My real mother is an attorney, but had her own firm for a while. Just grew up with people who had that spirit. And it's something that, yes, it can be taught, but there's also something very innate about it too.
Yeah, I agree. Sounds like it was in your DNA, and it probably
Yeah.
led you there eventually, some way, somehow. And here you are, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did you get the nickname Get Your Life Together Girl? How did that come about?
So I have 3 kids, mom of 3, and one of them is nearly 20, one is almost 18, and one will be 12 next week. And to my daughters, whenever they were kind of stumbling or something, I'd be like, "Can you just get it together, girl?" And that sort of became the catchphrase that happened. And so whenever we were opening the Instagram page, I realized that that was kind of the theme of what I wanted to teach people, was how to get out of their own way, how to use the tools that could be available to them. And that was it. Like, can you just get yourself together? And so it became Get Your Life Together, Girl.
Nice. So, what ended up spearheading the podcast, to launch the podcast? Because you said you were in a news anchor, so you had some
Yeah.
previous experience being on air, et cetera, and you're doing all these other things in that same vein with helping people.
Yeah.
Where'd the podcast come into play?
Do you want the honest answer?
Yeah, of course.
My agent.
Okay.
My agent was like, if you want to write books, you need a bigger platform. And when you have a platform that's really kind of one-dimensional, which was social media, it doesn't give enough exposure, which goes back to that business element of things. And so we were talking about what was the next innate step. What made the most sense? What are you most comfortable doing? Well, I'm comfortable in being on camera. I'm comfortable talking off the cuff. I was really good at live shots. Like, that made sense. And so it became this process that I fell in love with. And that's why I do the podcast, to be really honest, at least in the beginning. Now I do it because there's not a day that goes by that I don't get an email from someone that says, "Hey, by the way, I listened to that podcast and you gave me something else to think about." Or how many messages I've gotten where people have said, "You know what? I listened to you and you literally saved my life. I was thinking about taking my life that day and I listened to this episode and I realized that things aren't as bad." So from what started as a nurturing factor for myself has become a nurturing factor for other people. And I just don't see myself stepping away from that, because if it helps one person, that's all that matters to me.
Yeah. And it sounds like it was a natural progression for you because of what you did. And I think your agent probably identified that as well. In addition to the business aspects of things, it was an easy transition to kind of elevate your brand, if you will, and your ability to help those that you're looking to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes you don't see things the way somebody else does, like another coach or an agent or whatever. And so when somebody in business looks at something and says, "Hey, this is the next natural step," you follow it, right? What's the worst that could happen? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So,
well, so being that this was something that you weren't necessarily thinking about or kind of, on your docket to launch into, what's your big takeaway? What's like one thing that you've really learned from it that's really impacted you in a positive way?
This is something that's impacted me across the board in every aspect of everything that I do, whether it's speaking or courses or in private session or the podcast, or even on Instagram where I write stuff daily. The biggest thing is you come to a space where you have a factor of how you think a word or a thought process or even a product may impact someone, and someone is going to use it in a different way. It's going to hit them in a different place. So my biggest question to myself is always, and it's a very business-minded question, is what's the pain point and what's the tool to solve the pain point? And so that's sort of the biggest thing that I've taken away, is that I may have a connection to something. Somebody is going to read that, experience it in a completely different factor, and it's going to benefit them. And I may never know how that is, but it works. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, you mentioned earlier that this was kind of born out of some health issues that you had with your middle daughter. And, I've had many guests on the show who've been through things that might have broken other people, right? And their level of resilience is just inspiring, similar to you. What are ways that people can build resiliency? Because I think that's something that's so important into their daily lives.
First and foremost, we have to understand what resiliency is. let's go there first. And then I'll answer your question. The first thing is resiliency is built in evidence. Where we use our strength and how we gain the strength is our connectivity to the moment. Resiliency is not actually in the moment that it's happening. It's in the look back. That's the biggest thing. During the time that we're experiencing a hard moment, take my middle daughter nearly losing her life because she was in kidney failure. I was using pre-built strength, something that had already occurred, pieces that had already given me enough strength, inertia to get through that moment. And when I got to the healing part of her experience, it was in the look back that the resiliency for the next thing happened. So that's the biggest thing. Resiliency is built in evidence, the look back. So in your day to day, something that I do every single day, big practice of mine that, maybe somebody listening can use is what worked today? What actually made me feel good? What gave me strength today? Because that is that look back experience. And sometimes it's nothing, right? Like nothing big happened today. There was nothing that really challenged me. It just was a day. Nothing wrong with that. But what exactly happened in a day that maybe I was challenged to, the 10th degree? And what did I have to use to get through that? And did I learn something new in that path? As if I did, that's a resiliency builder. So look for the evidence.
So am I hearing that basically everybody has this resiliency kind of factor in them? It's just a differential between those who take the time to recognize how they actually got through that event, that situation in their life, versus those who just continue going on their day and don't really look back to see how they got through that and learn from it. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Absolutely. It's a brilliant question, right? Like a lot of times people don't look at it, oh, I'm not as strong. Is that really the truth? You are as strong as the next person. It's just that you're not actually using the things that happened for you, the experiences, the lessons, the evidence that you had from the past to use it now. So it's all pre-built. You have it. Everybody has experiences. Everybody has hard experiences. Are you using what you learned? Can you even identify what you learned?
So amazing. So those who feel they are resilient after today and listening to us can even become more resilient and exercise that muscle. And those who feel that they're not resilient, if they start doing this practice that you suggest, that resiliency kind of gene, for lack of a better word, should start kicking in, or trait, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Well, so let's say that resiliency is a tool. It is a habit. Because if we look at resiliency as a trait, that means that some people are born without it, and that's not true. Yeah.
Fair enough. And I think in this day and age, right, there's a lot of debate over whether, our young folks have this resiliency factor or resiliency habit, or if they have it. So you're saying they do. We just have to get them to recognize it and use it.
They absolutely do. We all have it. I think that a lot of people, well, that's a whole other conversation. I think a lot of people our age tend to think that the younger generations don't have enough of what we have. And I want to argue that the generations two generations above us thought the same thing about us. So, or their parents or their children or whatever. So I think that becomes an aging factor for us, is like, oh, but they don't handle the things that the way we do. Well, yeah, the world's not the same.
Right.
So, it's not the same as it was. And you have to kind of look at things that way instead of they don't have it. Their world is different than ours.
Good points. One of the most powerful lines I know my wife tries to internalize and share with our boys, we have two boys, 18 and 21, is that the most important voice is the one you hear in your head, right? We try to get them to think about that. And inspirational quotes are great and seem to help for a small time. But how can people internalize self-love and internalize that voice that they have in their head in a positive way?
Whew, how long do we have? We got a couple hours. All right. So here's the biggest thing. is understanding whose voice is talking. You're right. You're 100% right. Quotes are great. It goes back to that same idea that I said before, like writing something and somebody's going to internalize it differently. It has a different meaning to someone. Whose voice is it? This is the most powerful question you can ask. I often teach people about nurture versus nature. What's your true nature? Is it that you're loving and compassionate? Is it that you are kind of bullheaded and, that you rush through things? Are you a perfectionist? Is that your true nature? What is your nature versus what you were taught? Were you taught that you are strong and resilient and powerful? Were you taught that you should speak less, that you should be limited, that you can't start a business, that you can't do these things? What is the internal voice? And does it match who you really see yourself as? Because if you listen to the internal voice and hey, this belongs to me, these are my thoughts, but that nurture fights it, you'll always have despair. It's always going to be a problem. So I love the listen to your inner voice. Let's make sure that it's your inner voice, right? Like, how can you get there? Well, asking whose voice is this? Is this my belief? I often will challenge people to kind of look at their belief system. Doesn't matter. Personal, mental, emotional, and business. Doesn't matter where we're looking. Financial. Does this belief system align with what I really truly think? If I was at a dinner party and it didn't matter what I said, no one was going to get mad. Would my opinion be the same as what I'm saying now versus the PC answer that I'm going to give? This is how we identify the voice. That's really how we get there. It's a starting point.
Yeah, and I think that kind of dovetails into, we all have this kind of vision of who we want to be and what we want to look like or what we want to do and how we want to do it, et cetera. How do we take that voice, and it may be intertwined or it may be something different, and utilize that or utilize other tools to kind of work our way towards and transform ourselves into that ideal version of ourselves, right? Most people, I think, have a goal and a version of themselves that may be much different than they're at today, that they're striving to be. How do they start working in that direction and go through and make that transformation? I know it's not easy, but there are certainly, I would imagine, some steps that people could start taking.
Yeah. Let's first identify, are we doing it because we think there's something wrong? If we think that there's something wrong, we want to identify what the wrong is because we want to kind of work backwards. So the way that I set any goal is I have an end result in mind. What is my end result? I want to become the best version of myself. That's great. What does that mean? What does that look like? What does that feel like? How does that person move in the world? How do they show up for themselves and for other people? That's really what we want. We want a very deep version of the goal. And then we counterintuitive work backwards, step by step by step. If there's nothing wrong, but we just want to grow, we need to get very clear about what we want to grow in, right? Because nothing actually matters if it's this kind of elusive thing that we want to do. I want to be a better version. Great. What does that mean? What does that look like? So that's kind of the first step, is getting very clear about who that person is, what they feel like, what they do, how they move through the world, what's their intentionality. And then we put the steps in place. That's the first place.
I think people get tripped up on that part, right? Because to your point, if you don't get that part down, you really can't go on to step 2 at all, right? And I think where people get hung up is on the details. So how specific do people need to be with that version of themselves? Do they have to have everything figured out today, or just a general sense of what they want to be and what they want to achieve?
I like a middle ground, right? Because I don't want the result to be so targeted that we get frustrated in trying to get there, right? Because it's always going to shift a little bit depending on the little micro movements that create an end result. But if we kind of get to the middle ground, so no expectation, high expectation, middle ground, I'm connected to a result, but I'm not so connected to the result that I am only solely focused on the result. That's kind of where I want you to be, is in that middle space of, this is what I want. This is what it looks like. Here's what I'm trying. That word trying is big, to achieve. And then here's my little steps to get there. What's in my way? That's also how I start every process. What's in my way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then I can put things in the middle.
Yeah, I think we all, what's that saying? We overestimate what we could do in a year and underestimate what we could do in 3, 5, whatever longer time frame you want to put in there. I think, fits the bill. So I think that's the point. So I interrupt you. So what's step 2 after you figure out this path, your version? What's the next step?
Figure out what's in the way, right? So that's the second one. What is actually going to be my roadblock? And I'm going to not let me just throw this out there. Usually it's you. Usually you are the one that's in the way because you're not open enough to seek something different. You're not open enough to be willing to fail. You're not open enough to challenge yourself. You're set in this mindset. Well, if I do this, then I'm going to get the result, but it didn't work last time, so I'm just not going to start. You are in the way, right? So finding the pieces. Then step 3 is, how am I going to get there? I always ask 4 questions. It goes to how we get to the end result, but also how we get there. And it is, what do I want? What do I need? That's a big one. How do I want to feel? And how do I get there? So that's kind of what you're answering. And those are the steps to get to the end result, the best version.
And are those 4 questions that you just mentioned, are those similar questions? Because you said in step 2, the biggest hurdle typically is yourself, right? And a lot of that has to do with mindset. We kind of take our past and we're kind of forecasting that the same results are going to happen that happened in the past. And you mentioned that being a mindset issue, right? So are those 4 questions that you ask yourself, are those the same 4 questions to help you work towards changing that mindset too, in terms of how you're approaching that roadblock and that thing in your way?
Absolutely. Those 4 questions are what I like to call discovery questions. Because if you're open and honest with yourself about what those answers really are, not like, what do I want? I want to feel good. Great. Right? Like that's so plain. That doesn't tell me anything. Let me challenge you. How do I want to feel? I want to feel like I want to get out of bed in the morning. I want to feel like when I open my bank account that I have evidence of my hard work. I want to feel like I have owned every position and every thought process that has come to this, to this mindset that I have. Those are true needs and feelings. That's kind of where I want the thought process to go. It's like I can shift my mindset if I give myself the evidence that the mindset's working for me.
Right. Yeah, I think mindset is so important. And I guess one of the ways that you can reinforce the, mindset, and I think you've talked about it, is the use of affirmations to kind of help reinforce that. So how do you suggest people use affirmations to help you be your best self, right? Because that's essentially what you're trying to do. You've gone through this process. You're now working on that. You've figured out what the hurdles are. You're working on changing that mindset. Now you got to reinforce that constantly, because we have a tendency to forget what we ate for breakfast yesterday. So we're going to forget this too. So how do you go about doing that with the affirmation process?
Yeah. So that question has 3 answers to it. And I want to give you all 3 because all 3 are important. First is understanding how your thought process works. Very, very simple. Let's narrow it down. 1, thought comes in, it has nothing to it. I always use a very silly example because most people can connect to it. 1 is, I am hungry. Okay. There's nothing to it, right? It means nothing to you. If you've eaten, you're going to be like, no, I'm not. So you actually confirm or deny the thought. If you are hungry, your emotional body rises to meet that, right? So thought, feeling happens. feelings like, oh my gosh, I'm starving. I haven't eaten in like 6 hours. I'm going to, fall down and die, right? So the emotional body is creating something within us. Then action takes place. You may run out and grab something to eat. You may actually continue the next thought, which is also an action. This is really important because as we use affirmations, we're telling the thought process, the feeling process, and the action process to lock into the brain what we find most important. There's a caveat. Okay, and this is answer 2 to all of this. If you do not believe what you tell yourself, the emotional body is going to rise and go, no, you don't. Right? Like, I want to be financially independent. No, you don't. Right? I want to be the best version of myself. No, I don't. So we have to actually believe what we tell ourselves. The third part of it is affirmations work because the brain picks up in patterns. So anytime that we are telling ourselves something and we believe it and our brain hears it enough, we have this very small piece of our brain, back of the spinal cord, the base of our brain, that I like to call the bouncer. It's got a formal name, but I call it the bouncer. So what happens with affirmations is that bouncer kind of allows things in. I like to liken it to, younger listeners and viewers are not going to remember this most likely, but the yellow punch buggy VW game that we all played when we were kids, or the license, right? That look on your face.
My kids still play the punch buggy game, so they're aware of it. So yeah.
Thank goodness. Yeah. So it's sort of like that, right? Like driving down the road, you're looking for the yellow car. You've given the bouncer the okay to start looking for that particular thing. And all of a sudden, there's all of these yellow cars on the road. Whereas before, when you're not playing that game, you don't see any of them. Or you're not actively playing the game, but all of a sudden you see it and here comes the hit for it, right? Mm-hmm. That's how affirmations work. You're telling yourself something. You're telling the bouncer, hey, let this thing in. I want to feel good. I begin to look for the evidence of feeling good. That's why affirmations work. Amazing. Your brain pattern has an instruction to look for the good.
And that just helps you change the mindset, work towards those goals, make those changes that we discussed. So it's all a process, like everything else in life, it sounds like. So,
yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was, what did sharing your story on PBS's Roadtrip Nation, what did that mean to you? What was that like?
Talk about affirmations in motion. Okay. I have listened to Dr. Wayne Dyer for a very long time. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's passed, an amazing psychologist who did a lot of work in mindset and affirmations and spirituality. Big mentor just by his work. One thing that I had set out to do was to have a special on PBS. I didn't put any attachment to it, right? So that was the end goal. It was a mid-level, whatever it looks like. And I get an email I guess it's been about 2 years now, and asking if I would be a part of this show on PBS. And I was like, interesting. Is this a real email? Right? And so I kind of started conversing, and it was one of those moments of, this is what I set in place. This is what I told the bouncer I wanted to do. And here it is. I did nothing for it. It just came by the nature of what I do. And it was a very beautiful thing to be able to teach for young adults about mindset and kind of open their eyes to new things was such a beautiful moment of, we'll call it validation, right? To be able to say, this is my path. This is what happened, and here's why I'm here. And that can happen for any of us. It goes back to resiliency. Mm-hmm. It goes back to nurturing what you want and putting your affirmations in place, believing that something's possible for you.
Amazing. All these things that you're talking about, just bring life to people and make it more joyful. And we're all about joy on the Mitlin Money Mindset. And one of the things that we ask all of our guests is our final question, which is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
I love that question. If I may step aside for a second, I ask my guest something very, very similar, which is to give me 3 gratitudes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's beautiful. For me today, I've been in session since 7 a.m. this morning, and I got to meet with somebody who has been really struggling for about 2 years. And I watched something transform in them today that showed me that their power and their resiliency is in full motion. So for me, those victories are evidence that I am living purpose. And that to me is joy. Anytime I can show up and offer lessons or tools or joy, it makes me feel like I have gone through the things that I have in order to help somebody else move through theirs. So that to me is just beautiful joy.
I definitely see a lot of joy in that. So I applaud you for helping those that you're helping. I'm sure it's very well needed and well received. And, we're going to have all of your information in the show notes. But if people want to learn more about you, learn more about what you're doing, or learn about the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, what's the easiest and the best place for them to go to do that?
So you can go to my website, which is getyourlifetogethergirl.com. Or you can even just put my name in, Danielle A. Vann, on the internet, and there'll be an embarrassing amount of search results that happen. You can also go to Instagram, which is Get Your Life Together Girl, or Clapper, Facebook, TikTok. I think we're on every social media at this point. And then my podcast is on every major platform. So whether that's iTunes or Apple or Spotify, Audible, all of those places, you can listen there and you can connect with me. I always take personal emails as well, or send me a DM. I'm always open. I'm not one of those people that are, especially on Instagram, having somebody else answer for me. I want to hear from you. I want to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, Danielle, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I thank you so much for sharing your methods and information around mindset, affirmations. I think that this is such important stuff, no matter who you are, what age you are. It's stuff that can be easily implemented and can add a lot of joy to people's lives. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for taking out the time to share with our listeners today, and enjoy the day. I want to thank Danielle Vann for being a guest on the Mitlin Money Mindset. Danielle's experiences, like us all, is what makes her who she is today. Her resiliency and desire to better herself gives inspiration to all those that surround and work with her. We truly appreciate Danielle's openness to have candid conversations about mental health, as it is people like her that will help us lead to a world where there is no stigma and others will be inspired to share their stories and seek help if needed. Danielle Vann and the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Mitlin Money Mindset. Remember, it's not just about the money, it's finding joy in the journey and embracing the right mindset. If you love the show, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Don't forget to follow along for more tips and inspiration. Please visit the social links below to connect with Larry or his guests. Until next time, keep smiling, keep thriving, and remember to think about, what did you do today that brought you joy?